Hello everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. Today we are at the Utah State Capitol and we are going to talk about the coal moratorium. Secretary of the Interior recently placed in place a record of a moratorium on coal production, no new leases. We're going to talk about the impacts that will have on the industry, on the communities, and on your pocketbook and how we produce electricity. We'll meet our panel in just a minute, but first I thought I would give you the nuts and bolts of this moratorium. The January 16th order for a broad review of the federal coal leasing program by Interior Secretary Sally Jewell included a moratorium on any new leases for coal development on public land, with a few exceptions. The reasoning was to prevent decades-long leases from being issued that would not reflect changes resulting from the review that's going on now. A major consideration of the plan is to include air quality and environmental impact costs of the end user into the lease cost for the producer. The Secretary feels that with a 20-year supply already under lease, she can afford to hit the pause button for a few years. The coal community does not see it as a short pause because most likely coal leases that they are developing and have spent years working on would have to start all over again. Coal-producing communities are already hurting as a result of EP regulations that have or will shutter 72 gigawatts of generating power. That's enough for about 45 million homes a year. They have instead been shifting from supplying domestic coal to exporting it abroad, which is now off the table too. The coal economies of the West feel like the last open door to their future has just been shut. We will now move our conversation in the Capitol and meet with our panelists here on the County Seat. We'll be right back after this commercial break.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
In a place that is beyond words, there is nothing to be said, except take your time in Bryce Canyon country.
Welcome back to the County Seat. We are on topic today with the coal moratorium the Department of Interior issued about 6 weeks ago, and joining us for a discussion of its impacts that it will have on the state, Mark Compton, who is the president of the Utah Mining Association, Gordon Topham, commissioner from a coal-producing county, Sevier County, and Dr. Laura Nelson, who's the executive director of the Governor's Office of Energy. Did I get that right?
That's great.
Excellent. Thank you for taking the time to join us. You all three have been on the show in the past. It's the first time we've had the three of you together. So I think I want to spend a few minutes talking about the global impact of this, and we'll kind of work our way down to the community level. A lot of people think that this is just only an impact in the communities where it's happening, but if you look at the 30,000 foot level, Dr. Nelson, what kind of impacts will this moratorium have?
Well, I guess I would say, first of all, that I think that there's not a recognition that coal is an important part of a resilient energy mix. And that doesn't just mean for Utah, it means for our nation. Now in Utah, we do use about 60% of our consumption of electricity is coal, and about 80% of what we produce here is used to meet that coal production and that coal consumption in the state. So there's definitely a local impact. But if you look at a national level where close to 50% of our energy production is from coal, and you can't get the coal out of the ground for that production, then there are going to be real impacts. And we have some of the most most efficient coal plants here in Utah. In fact, our emissions of sulfur dioxide and NOx are down 25% from 1990 levels. That means here in Utah and in the U.S. generally, we are driving the best innovations in the use of coal and also in the production of coal, and we're going to be cutting off those opportunities to globally export those advanced technologies both in production and utilization of coal. And one more thing I'd like to add is that our school and institutional trust lands, which may only represent 5% of coal resources in the ground today, that's billions of dollars. And what the federal government is doing doesn't just impact the 80+% of coal resources that are located on federal lands, it impacts our ability to use those resources, which has real impact for Utah school children.
So the federal moratorium will have an impact on bringing coal out of the ground from Sitla?
Correct, because oftentimes what you look to do is kind of pull together resources, and some of these Sitla blocks are co-located with federal blocks of land, and if you can't develop those federal blocks, then there's a good chance that you're not going to be able to develop those school institutional trust land blocks.
Well, Chad, just to take that global perspective a little farther, you know, when you look at, I mean, we are a leader in coal production and coal technology in the world. And when you look at, we have about 7 billion people on this planet right now. It's projected to be 9 billion in just a couple of decades. The Utah population is projected to double by 2050. About half of the world's population right now has very little or no access to energy. And when you look at really the biggest source of pollution and poor health in the world, it's not coal, it's poverty. And so if we're going to meet our rising energy demands, both here at home and abroad, and raise the standard of living around the world, coal is going to have to be a part of that mix. We can't meet our demands without it.
Okay, people look at this as a static point, and they say we are at a point where we've got technology, coal is still putting out carbon dioxide, and it doesn't matter how many trees you plant, you're not going to fix that. So are we at the end of the technological road?
Not by any means. We have a number of technologies that are advancing in the state right now that are looking at ways that you can co-fire with coal, either using natural gas or biomass that can significantly reduce emissions. We've also looked historically at how we can capture carbon, but the challenge is that the federal government is moving away from looking at what I call these new coal technologies. I think we've got an opportunity to do that here in Utah and continue to drive that message, but we are by no means at the end of our technological trajectory.
I even understood in the last conversation I had with John Siegel on some of the issues of coal, he said that all of the man-made coal on the CO2 accounts for some remarkably small number. So if we did all the cutbacks on coal, took coal out of the picture, it's like a 3%. I don't really remember the exact number, but is that a pretty small impact?
Well, first of all, I would say that, you know, by the estimates that I've received, 21st century coal-fired power plants emit about 40% less CO2 than 20th century coal plants. But I mean, it's just, I forgot exactly where I was going with this one now, but sorry.
But well, I think the big message is that we're not necessarily, people want to talk about dirty coal and they want to talk about clean coal, but we need to start talking about new coal. Coal has a place in our energy future, it has a place in our economic future, the technologies are there, and I think the worst thing that we can do is to stop that technological advance, either in the production of coal or in the consumption of coal, because to Mark's point, we have made tremendous strides, and nobody is talking about those strides, and to the extent that you limit people's ability to access affordable, reliable, resilient energy, you're really putting them in a position of moving into more impoverished situations. And that certainly is the case with our local communities where we're taking away those jobs. That's going to push them into more impoverished situations. And what we know from the global picture is that that isn't good for anyone.
So this moratorium, just to be clear, as a last point before we go to commercial break, it not only affects coal production that we use in domestic coal, but it also would have an impact on export to other countries that need coal. Is that correct?
If you can't get the coal out of the ground, even if you have the infrastructure to move it, it will be very difficult to make those clean, high BTU resources available to the rest of the world.
And that's a point that should be made. Utah coal is very high quality coal. It's low sulfur, high BTU coal that is in demand worldwide.
I believe it's some of the lowest sulfur coal in the world, is
That's
it not?
correct.
All right. We're going to take a quick break here on the county seat. Our topic today is the recent coal moratorium. We are looking at it instead of from a bureaucratic level, a state level, and an industry level, and a community level. We'll continue our conversation here on the county seat right after this commercial break.
Kanab, base camp for your southern Utah adventures. You belong in Kanab.
What would you do with an extra day in Utah Valley? Explore the Wasatch Mountains? Snap a family photo at Bridal Veil Falls. Cool off on Utah Lake or the Provo River. No matter what you're searching for, you can find it in Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
What do you picture when you hear Rich County, Utah? Bear Lake Adventure? Snowmobile action? Pristine skiing? Spectacular solitude? Well, if that isn't what first came to mind, then you just don't know Rich County. The Bear Lake Monster Polar Plunge, snowmobiling Monte Cristo, ice fishing Bear Lake, skiing the backcountry, fishing at the Cisco Disco. Come and find out what you never knew you were missing. Rich County, Utah.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are at the Utah State Capitol. Obviously, you can hear during the legislative session the school children in the background learning about government. Our topic today, we've been discussing the recent coal moratorium. We're going to turn our attention now for this segment to talk about industry impacts. Because as I sit through and I read what I've been seeing in the press, the newspapers, the television reports, they say it's that Secretary Jewell put a temporary moratorium. It's not affecting existing coal development. We just have to take a break long enough to figure out and review a policy that's been in place for 30 years. We'll be back online with something better. So if you've got a 20-year supply, my brain is going, okay, so it's not like we don't have anything to produce. What's the big deal? Mark, you don't think that that's the case?
Well, certainly I think there is an impact right now to industry. I mean, there are about 50 leases nationwide that this affects. There are a few in Utah, and I know that those companies right now are evaluating the implications of this moratorium on their specific projects and looking for ways they may be able to move through this. There are some exemptions and exceptions set out in the secretarial order, and I know companies are looking at that. But there are certainly cases where you have companies that are moving from a private lease into a federal lease, back into a private lease. That's just the way that the coal seam, just following that coal. And if they're put in a moratorium here for 3 years, they may not be able to access the private reserves that they need to. Plus, you have about 40% of all of our nation's coal production is on federal lands. So depending on what they determine out of this moratorium, I mean, it's the 3-year moratorium is one thing. What they decide to do coming out of it is another. So if they're restricting access moving forward, that will have very serious implications to our nation's coal supply.
The lease process doesn't just happen overnight. In the Sufco mine that's in our county right now, they've been working on a lease that they hope to get through that they started on in 2005. That's 11 years, and they still don't have the lease yet. So it's not a matter of we just pause for a couple of years. It takes a long time once you start going through that lease process to jump through all the hoops that are required of the federal government.
So as I read the order in preparation for the show, it sounded like if they're past NEPA with it, then it continues. Is that correct or not correct?
If there's a final decision then they can continue. That's one of the things that's kind of frustrating for me and for the industry is if we're going to take a break, it would make sense to me to say, okay, there are going to be no new lease applications being accepted. But when you're affecting applications that are already in process and companies have borne the expense of environmental analysis, and you're in the middle of this process and then you're saying, okay, for 3 years now, we're not going to let you get to a final decision, that has serious implications for the industry. So the moratorium actually
affects leases in process if they're not a final decision. So they may have cleared the NEPA hurdle, but if they don't have a final rule on the register, they're putting the brakes on.
Yeah, and we have three mines or mine plans that really I think are going to be impacted by this, and one of them is the Sufco mine located in the Commissioner's District. We feel hopeful that because they do have a decision, they will be able to move forward. But two other mine expansions, really one that's been in a permitting process for 11 or 12 years, Alton Coal, may not be able to proceed. And then similarly, the Lila Canyon mine, and both of those mines are important for providing resource for our local production activities, are in limbo. And the key, I think, component here and message here is the uncertainty that this rule puts into effect, because these are long-term investment decisions that require a long-term expenditure of dollars around environmental impacts and overall development, and they don't, as the Commissioner said, occur overnight. So they're throwing in this ball of uncertainty and these very complex investment decisions that have to be made, and we are concerned that 2/3, so it may only be 3 mines that are impacted, but 2/3 of the mines that we have moving forward with NEPA and in some process of NEPA are sort of being impacted, and the other 1/3, the other mine, potentially impacted.
I would also point out that it's hard to understand how the Interior Department or the American taxpayer would be harmed by these leases going forward. I mean, climate change and the direct and indirect impacts of greenhouse gas emissions can be studied as part of the NEPA process. Environmental stipulations can and are included in terms and conditions of leases. The current lease process involves public comment, competitive bidding, and make sure that accepted bids meet fair market value. So I don't understand really why the leases that were already in process are part of this moratorium.
Well, those were a lot of the things that kept getting mentioned as stakeholder concerns. In the actual order, there wasn't a lot of detail in it, and I don't know exactly where you go to get that detail.
Chad, there was, I've been in Washington earlier this week and dealing with this as one of the issues I was there for. And I was told that this pause would be 2 to 3 years, which I don't believe. When we have a temporary emergency road closure, some of them have been closed for 9 years now. It's not, the federal government doesn't step up and jump into things like we would expect them to do. So
what's the dynamics, Mark? I mean, if a company has to, if there's a moratorium, we think, okay, well, we're on furlough, we're not going to work. So what is it? Can a company just say, okay, guys, go home, come back in 2 years?
Well, obviously, it has serious implications to jobs and very rural parts of the state that those jobs are critical. They pay twice the average statewide wage. So very, very serious implications for the industry.
All right, well, we're going to come back after this commercial break. We're going to go into the community level and look at some of these issues. Thank you. You're watching The County Seat. We're talking about the impacts of the coal moratorium and how Utah sees it affecting their future. We'll be right back.
There is a place where looking out means looking in, where an impression lasting only a few seconds will be imprinted on a life forever, where courage is forged and innocence rediscovered, where remembering is rewarding and forgetting unforgettable. There is a place where truth is felt and where seeing is believing. There is a place.
Color, it's something that can be seen. But have you ever wanted to reach out and touch it? Experience it. In San Juan County, Utah, color comes to life like nowhere else on earth. Color can be more than an abstract. Color can be your gateway to a new world. Visit San Juan County and explore the past, present, and future in a way that you've only dreamed of. San Juan County. Color your experience.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking today about the coal moratorium placed by the Department of Interior, the impacts it has on the state, the global picture, the industry picture. Now we want to kind of bring it down to the community level and get our panel's thoughts about the community impact. And Gordon, you're sitting in the middle of a community.
Yeah. The Sufco mine is the biggest employer in our county. We have almost 400 people work in that mine, and they're not minimum wage jobs. Their average is $108,000 a year. Then trucking to move that coal from point A to point B is another 250 jobs, all at about a $53,000 a year. So those are people that would lose their jobs if we lose the coal. Then if you step into the other parts of the economy that they lend into, let me just read a couple of statistics here. In mine labor, they come into our community with almost $43 million a year, $18 million in truck driver salaries, $39 million in supplies and services they spend in our community, $4.4 million in utility bills. To our county's tax base, $1.5 million. To the federal government tax base in Black Lung, $5.6 million. Abandoned mine tax to Utah, I guess that's federal too, $700,000. And then to the state of Utah, $14.9 million in taxes to the state of Utah. And part of that comes back to the county that we live in. So that's $128 million from that one mine in our community. That's a big impact.
And those are direct dollars to
right.
the community.
And we're asked to try and diversify our economy. Our economy used to be diversified. We used to have all kinds of business. It was all based on federal land, though, because that's what we have. 84% of our county belongs to government. So several years ago, we lost the timber industry, which was a big part of our economy. They decided to start managing for endangered species rather than for timber. Then we have our tourism industry is based on motorized vehicles. We're challenged by environmental organizations to close some of those trails down. If we lose that, there goes that part of our economy. And now this blow on the largest industry in our community, which is coal. So how do we diversify when the place we have to base our economy on is public land that we're losing access to?
Well, if you cripple the economy too far, then you can have everybody move out and you can create a wilderness area.
I guess
okay,
so.
Now that was editorial that I'll probably get in trouble for. I know I'm going to get emails, but I said it anyway.
Well,
Mark.
Well, I was just going to say, to add on to what the commissioner was saying, I think it's important to realize that it's not just this coal moratorium. This is what I would consider the latest in a series of attacks on affordable energy, really, in this country. Whether it's the Clean Power Plan, the Stream Protection Rule, regional haze that I feel what's coming from the EPA is not based on science, at least not on what we have uniquely here in Utah. And so it's just, it's a series of attacks that all added up puts a lot of our rural communities in jeopardy.
Well, and I guess I would just add to that, you know, today, interestingly, we use fewer fossil fuels in our energy portfolio than we did in 1960. So in 1960, we were more heavily dependent on fossil fuels than we are today, which says that we are enhancing our renewable fuels portfolio as part of our overall energy portfolio. And that has been done on the backs of these other resources, in particular coal, because it provides a known commodity in terms of providing affordable, reliable energy that is available pretty much all the time. And if you take coal out of the equation, I want to state that it's not just going to impact the coal industry, it is going to impact our energy portfolio across the board. It's going to affect our ability to continue to bring on renewable resources, because you're not just going to replace it with batteries. You're going to have some kind of backup power for that. And where that's going to come from in the quantities that are currently provided by coal is an equation that we have not solved, either as a nation or globally.
And I think there's been, you know, when you look at other energy sources, clean energy sources as we call them, they've been subsidized in order to try and bring them online. The cleaning up of the coal that we've talked about, that's been the industry itself that's done that. Because of regulations from the federal government was part of it, but they've gone ahead and tried to clean it up. And that's why the emissions are down so low. You know, it just surprises me when now we're going to attack carbon dioxide. I'm a biologist by training. That's where I got my education. I understand the value of carbon dioxide. It's every time I exhale, I'm polluting. You know, plants use
You
that.
could be taxed.
Yeah, that's right.
For breathing.
For breathing. Yeah, that's what I mean. Carbon dioxide is not a poison at all. It's something the plant community needs to live. It's something, I just had a carbonated drink a few minutes ago. I consumed some there. It's in our environment. It's part of our lives. But now, because the industry has pretty much cleaned everything else up, this is the next thing to attack, is the carbon dioxide. And that's scary.
Can't we just plant more trees?
Yeah.
Well, our state and our communities have been very engaged in looking at the best practices. We all want to protect our environment. I think we're all motivated to do that. And we believe that having access to affordable, reliable energy allows us the opportunity to make sure that we appropriately manage our environment as well. And everybody who works in these industries understands that they need to do best management practices so you have longevity of that industry.
Gordon, a point. If you're talking about approaching 500 jobs out of Sevier County, if I was in Salt Lake County, 700. It would be 700, no big deal. What kind of impact is that on a labor force in a population basis, Sevier County?
It's probably 25% of our labor. And these are the higher salary positions, you know. So if you're talking about the money into the community in labor, it's probably closer to 40%.
Wow. You were about to say something.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, to Secretary Jewell, if she's really interested in having an open and honest discussion about the federal coal leasing program and what's in the public interest, I think what's in the public interest is making sure that federal coal is available and competitive in the marketplace. The result is going to be increased jobs throughout the supply chain and more revenue to federal and state governments.
Very good. Thank you all so much for participating in our program. Thank you for tuning in here on the County Seat. Remember, local government is where your life happens. Be involved, be part of the equation, and we'll see you next week on the County Seat. Thank you. If you'd like to share this video with your friends, well, you do that right here. If you would like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, you do that over here. If you'd like to interact with us on the County Seat, that happens over here. If you want to watch the next episode of the County Seat, you can catch it Saturday night at 11 or Sunday morning at 8:30 on ABC4 Good for Utah.